In New York, plants perceive humans as a threat, prompting them to embark on self-defense. Uniquely, this results in people harming themselves, leading to an uncontrollable wave of suicides sweeping across the Northeast United States. Consequently, today marks the end of times as we know it. The story begins in Central Park, and the first thing we see is that everyone is acting in a very weird way. People reading, working out, or strolling through the iconic Big Apple Park start hurting themselves without any explanation. Several dead fall one after another, but this is only the beginning. It is a morning like all the others, but soon everything changes when in a construction near Central Park, one of the workers falls from the top of the building. His co-workers stop joking when they come to the top floor of the building, and they realize that it is not a simple work accident, but that everything is suicide. Now we are going to meet the protagonist of our film, whose name is Elliot Moore and who is a science teacher in a high school. All goes well until the suicides begin to alarm the entire population and the students must be evacuated. Why is a terrorist group identified by the authorities as primarily responsible for the attack? Apparently, they used a toxin that starts with speech confusion, physical disorientation, and the third Y: chilling suicide. In the midst of the situation, Julian, Elliot's good friend and co-worker, receives a call from his mother from Philadelphia, who is worried about the news. And although Julian and Elliot keep their cool, they prefer to go to Philadelphia to stay safe. Although New York must be evacuated, Grand Central Station is so congested that with great difficulty, Julian manages to get tickets on the train to travel with her little daughter, Yes. Elliot and his wife Alma. We now hear about Yvette, who is Julian's wife and mother of his daughter, but she can't make it to the station, so she tells Julian that she will be traveling on the next train and they will meet in Philadelphia. During the trip, the marital problems between Elliot and Alma surface because apparently Julian claims that before the wedding he managed to see Alma and found her undecided about whether she should say yes at the altar. Maybe this doesn't matter much, because in the meantime Alma receives a call from Joey, who until now we do not know his identity, but later we will have more news about him. In Philadelphia, everything is as usual. However, soon the air begins to turn cold and it is nothing more than the toxin that has reached the city and all the inhabitants take their lives. Cell phones don't stop ringing in the middle of such a strange situation and panic and tension circulate through the environment. As the citizens begin to lose their cool during the trip, an unexpected stop alerts all the passengers because they are in the small town of Philburg, Pennsylvania. Apparently, the train's communication was lost and they have decided to suspend the trip in a small local cafeteria. News of the Philadelphia situation unleashes panic. The first hypothesis about a terrorist attack is denied, since a small group of terrorists would not have been able to unleash such a crisis. In addition, the affected populations are found only in the northeast and are concentrated in small towns. However, they all decide to flee the best way they can, while Elliot, Alma, Julian, and little Yes must separate. Although Elliot manages to find a car in which they can all travel together, Julian is worried because he has no news from his wife Yvette. Given the communication problems, Julian decides to go for Yvette, who was on his way to Princeton on a bus. However, he leaves his young daughter Yes in the care of Elliot and Alma in hopes of meeting again soon. A botanist plans to return home to get supplies for the trip and offers Elliot, Alma, Aegis to go with them. And when they arrive at the botanist's house, he explains to them the possibility that it is a natural attack by plants, since plants are capable of releasing toxins and can be the cause of the events. Now though, we're back to Julian and his trip to Princeton. Along with his companions, Julian manages to reach Princeton to find his wife. He has hopes that the city has not been attacked, but these fade when they find the city utterly desolate. In an attempt to stay safe, they close all the windows of the car to prevent the wind from entering. But anyway, it is too late because the wind manages to sneak through the roof of the car and the driver accelerates the vehicle against a tree. And although Julian manages to get out, he is already affected by the toxin, so he grabs a glass to end his life. On the other hand, Elliot and the botanist try to find the best solution to save their lives from the toxin, but the first corpses are found in their path, signs that the population they are targeting has also been affected. As they turn off the road, they meet Private Auster. This warns them of the disaster, so they must divert the path again. The problem is that they find themselves at a crossroads where all the travelers are fleeing disaster. In the midst of the chaos, a woman in the group manages to communicate with her daughter in Princeton named Stacy, who before dying managed to confess to her that everyone in Princeton had died. Elliot and Alma learn of the sad ending that their good friend Julian has had. They realize that Yes has remained in his care and they are the only thing he has after the death of his parents. Despite all the confusion, they begin to organize a plan together with Private Auster, trying to collect the data. They realize that the attacks began in the largest and most populated cities until they reached the smallest counties. And right there, they managed to tie up some salary ends and they realize that large groups of people are the riskiest. Faced with that, they decide to divide. Some will go with Private Auster, while another group will be in charge of Elliot. Our protagonist heads to a small nearby county. Small and sparsely populated that does not appear on most maps. Along the way, Alma decides to confess to Alo who Joe is, and apparently it is a co-worker with whom he went out for dessert one day. However, he also confessed that it was only that, and it had not been of any importance, but he wanted to confess it so as not to hide anything from him if death came to him. In those circumstances, at one point a breeze reaches Private Auster's group, causing him to use his weapon to end his life and the lives of others. At the sound of gunshots, the wind comes towards Elliot, Alma, Yes, and the rest of their group, and in a desperate attempt to save their lives, they decide to split up into even smaller groups. After separating into smaller groups, the wind ends and apparently they manage to save their lives. Halfway along, Elliot finds a pair of radios with some signal, where it is speculated that radioactive plants may be the main trigger of mass suicides. When they arrive at a house, they manage to rest a little and regain their strength. Just as they move away from the house, they manage to see groups of people who are also seeking shelter in the very house where they had been. However, they confirm their theory, and since there are a lot of people together, they soon start to hurt themselves. By this point, several hours have already passed since the events broke out in El York, and they begin to seek refuge in the most unpopulated place they can find. They find a house again, but the inhabitants refuse to let them in and attack the teens in the group, and in fear, Alma takes Jesse, Elliot, and they decide to run away. A couple of minutes later, they find a shelter again that looks like a place uninhabited for a long time because it has no electrical connections. Upon arriving at the door, Elliot realizes that the owner known as Mrs. Jones is there, and apparently she is an eccentric woman without any type of social contact and with a demonic air. During dinner, they realize that the woman is totally isolated from the world and dedicates herself to growing her own food because she hates all people. However, during the night nothing happens, and when the sun rises he is alone in the room, but he hears Alma's voices and goes out to look for them. Although before he finds Mrs. Jones on his way, who warns them that they must leave their house. Immediately the woman leaves the house and the wind with the toxin infects her. And even though Elio tries to convince her to go back inside, it's too late and Mrs. Jones begins to break the windows with her own face. Alma and Yes are playing in the stable while Elliot finds a tube through which he can communicate with her and warns them that they must close the doors and windows so that the polluted air does not affect them. At that point, they remember their first date as they talk about the ring Elliot gave Alma, and they also realize how much they love each other. Elliot knows that these natural events reach a ridge and eventually descend, but they soon hear the wind again, and at this point they no longer know what to do. Elliot is tired, but he goes out to look for Alma by exposing himself to the wind. Faced with this, Alma and ES also go out to meet him, since if this is the end, they want death to find them together. However, an unexpected event occurs. Despite the wind, Alma, Jess, and Elliot are fine, have no symptoms associated with the toxin, and think that the natural event must have ended just before they found themselves outside the stable. After all this, they manage to return home, and after some time, scientists continue to search for the answer to these strange events. A scientist interviewed on a television program states that plants cannot move, so they have evolved rapidly to develop defense mechanisms. One of these mechanisms is the release of toxins that defends them against external attacks. For their part, Alma and Elliot became Yes's adoptive parents. They are super happy with their new family life. And finally, we find out that Alma is pregnant. Anyway, very far away. In France, everything seems to go on as usual, and a couple of friends walk through gardens as full of vegetation as Central Park, where the first attacks began. Everything is going well until one of the friends seems to have problems to talk. If the words can't come out of his mouth as they usually do, a woman's scream can be heard in the distance, and although at first it doesn't seem to be anything more strange than a scream in a park behind the couple of friends walking through the gardens, a wind begins to be felt, and it seems that the plants are ready to attack again. That was the end of times. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos.